Okay, we good now? Very good. We're looking at the topic of love. What spurred this class on was me having an interest in trying to work out the practical outworkings of love your enemy. And haven't gotten to that far yet in our study. And I figured that before we can start there, we better start with the very first part, and indeed the easiest part, because of the Spirit of God within you, which is loving God. So we start with loving God and loving one another, and then loving your brother, and now we're doing loving your neighbor. And we came through these verses, got through Hebrews 13. I want to look at Matthew 7 and then go back to some of our discussion from last week, because it's a shame that it took place at the end of the class, because it really was a good question, a thought-provoking question. I'm not sure I have all the answers, maybe a couple, but not all of them, and working on those things together. And that has to deal with looking at loving your neighbor and loving others in relationship to what our country is going through with the immigration situation. So in Matthew chapter 7 and verses 7 through 12, we'll get the context of it. Jesus says in his Sermon on the Mount, "Ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks the door will be opened. Which of you, if your son asked for bread, would give him a stone? Or if he asked for a fish, you'd give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children," and it's an argument from the least to the greater, "how much more then will your heavenly Father give good gifts to those who ask him?" And then comes this verse that's kind of a conclusion to so many things said so far with treasures in heaven and not worrying and judging others and all. So far he says now in verse 12, "So in everything do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets." As that phrase sums up the law and the prophets, are you familiar with that being used elsewhere by Jesus in Matthew? Huh? You're shaking your head yes. Whereabouts? Love the Lord your God, right. The love the Lord your God passage. That when you love the Lord your God and your neighbor as yourself, this sums up the whole law and the prophets. Now we have another passage that says the same thing, so what are you to understand from that then? They're connected, exactly right. That doing unto others you have them do unto you is part of the idea of loving God and loving others as you would love yourself. So that last phrase of when it comes to loving others as you would love yourself is indicative of what he says right here with saying that do to others what you would have them do to you. That's relating to that same phrase. You understand that? You see that together? You okay with that? And so it's a summation given here that the whole law and the prophets are really summed up in the command to love. And that command to love as you love yourself is also understood then that you would want to do to others as you would have them do to you. So with that in mind, let's go back to our discussion from last week, if you can put your thinking caps on. We were talking about loving your neighbor and things, and it was brought up about the immigration situation with even the current one with a caravan heading towards the border. Bill, you brought it up so thankfully. In talking at the coffee time, you mentioned something, and I forgot exactly what you mentioned. I wanted to address it today. Do you remember what you mentioned to me about? Oh boy, that was a whole week ago, wasn't it? About had to do with compassion. Do you remember? As we talk, maybe it'll come back to mind. So, again, in dealing with issues like this, the first thing that you must always do is you have to separate. What do you have to separate? No. Good guess, though. What do you have to separate? Well, God says it, yeah, but we're not going to separate what God says. What, Ruth? No, that's a good try, too.
Between being a Christian and politics.
Boy, my brother here has hit the nail right on the head. Walter, you get the lollipop today. We got to separate as believers in the new covenant. See, in the old covenant, it was easy. The politic and the command were one. Because it was a theocracy. It was a God-ruled nation. Israel was a God-ruled nation. So what God commanded of Israel as a nation was what he also commanded them as individuals in that nation under a God-ruled nation. You remember that, right? So it's easy to see that. In the new covenant, however, Jesus talks about bringing the kingdom of God. And in the kingdom of God, it'll be represented from people from where? Every nation, tribe, and tongue from all over the world. And so the command of living as kingdom children is to live as a kingdom child in whichever nation God has planted you. That God does not have a theocracy anymore. There is no country in the world that can claim to be God's nation. He doesn't have that anymore. That was fulfilled in Christ and the church. And so the church's command now in the new covenant is that we are to be acting as Christians regardless of where we live and according to the laws of the land that we live. That we follow the laws of the land that we live in as long as those laws don't do what? Make us contrary to what we must do in order to please God. And so, but otherwise, we have to follow them. If they say we're supposed to pay 60% of our wages to taxes, and that's what we pay. We obey the laws of the land, and we as good believers are a good citizen of that law of the land. But the commands that God gives to the believer are not commands he gives to a nation today. These are not commands for America as a nation. This is not something that whoever is in leadership, in the presidency, the Congress, no matter who they are, this is not something that God says they are required to follow. Do you think that we might be better off if they did? Perhaps in many ways, yes, but not in all ways. Because God established nations to stop people from their aggression against other people. So turn the other cheek as a Christian doesn't apply to the government. The government is supposed to have the sword in order to protect its citizens. You understand the balance there, the difference? Okay. So now that we get to the idea of loving your neighbor as yourself, we have a tricky situation because in our nation, with the immigration situation the way it is, there are many, many concerns and problems. And as a government, the government is trying to suggest what to do to solve. What are the concerns and the problems the government is trying to address? Let's start with those first. What are the immigration concerns? Whether the government is right or wrong, or whether it's from a Democratic or Republican or independent view, what are the views that are espoused out there about immigration? Okay, because we do have laws that say here's what requires a legal entrance into our country, and I keep getting asylum and asylum mixed up. Asylum is not the right word. That's for mental problems. Asylum is when you have political problems in a country and you're escaping the country because of your fear for your life and the problems that you face. And so we have laws that say, and Craig looked up for us last time, 600-some thousand people are accepted into America each year as immigrants are given an opportunity to come to America each year. If you apply for asylum, you have a waiting process, longer than just coming across with a visa. If you have a visa from the country you're leaving, and it was issued by the American embassy in that country, then as soon as you get to our airport with your visa and you go to customs, what are you allowed to do? You're allowed to enter the country right away because you have a visa. You have the proper documentation. If you don't have a visa, then you are what? Entering how?
Illegally.
Illegally. So if you come in a boat without a visa and you come to our borders without a visa, you are entering the borders illegally and must be processed. And so there is a process that the Immigration Department goes through on how to deal with these people. Sometimes it may be to refuse you to land. And other times it may be you land and you go to a temporary facility where you get checked out and you get to apply and different things. So, but if you come as a criminal into our country and you try to get in, and you try to get in legally by a visa, you'll be denied. Or if you try to get in and you're with a group of people and you get checked out and it's found out you were at a prison and so forth, then you're denied entrance into the country. The country does that for what reason? Security. To protect the people that are here. Because sometimes other countries have emptied their jails and sent them to other countries. Do you know how Australia was popularized?
Prisons.
Right. The people in England emptied their prisons and sent them to Australia to populate Australia. That was the majority of the population of Australia. And then they needed to have families, and so they took women off the street who were women of the evening, and they arrested them, and they sent them to Australia to be the wives of the criminal. Did you not know that, Pam?
No.
Yeah, that's what happened in the beginning of Australia. You didn't know that?
No, I'm not a history buff.
Well, that's what happened.
That's interesting.
That's what happened.
Huh?
What year was that?
2012. No. I don't know. It was probably in the 1800s or 1700s. I'm not sure.
That's history.
1700s?
Yeah,
Okay. Welcome, Austin. Austin's with us today. Good to have Austin here today. And if you have a Bible or you want a Bible, you may take the one that's in the pew in front. You may keep that, put your name in it. Take it home with you. Take it back. So that's how they populated that land. Now, that also happened to some degree in America. Prisons were emptied and people came to America. And also, people came to America that were fleeing persecution, some of them physical and some of them religious, who came to America fleeing persecution. So we have a diverse history, and the purpose of the government is to protect the citizens of that nation from criminals being added and so forth. And there should be due process for immigrants who can apply for a visa or can apply for asylum and can come in as legal immigrants and receive work and things of that nature. So that's the government side. What else? And the government is responsible to protect us then from criminals that would try to enter the country. But what is happening today is what with our government and the issues of immigration? What's happening today?
They're overwhelmed, and they're also being seen as unsensitive, even though they're processing a lot of the people from the south borders, as the law claims.
Okay. They're overwhelmed for sure, and sometimes they're being seen as insensitive, and sometimes they're being seen as how? Not just
Too sensitive.
as cruel, right? Because you know what happened recently when the little children and babies were taken from their mothers and their parents. That wasn't very sensitive, and people in the country were up in arms about that, and things are the same. So this is the government's responsibility. We are part of the government in that we get to vote. Tuesday's a voting day. We get to vote those who are going to represent, hopefully, what we've asked for, and if not, then you get to vote again. But to vote to speak for us. But now, as individual Christians, what are we supposed to do? It's not our job to protect and defend, and we don't have the power of the sword. That's given to the government. What is our responsibility as individual Christians when it comes to let's take the immigration situation. What's our responsibility?
Compassion.
Everyone must submit to governing authorities.
Everyone wants me to, but what's our responsibility from the Lord as individual Christians when it comes to like the immigration situation?
Compassion.
Compassion is what we looked at last week. Ruth?
You can make, yes, love. You can also pray for them.
Okay, well, we can make laws only through our representatives. As an individual, you cannot make a law.
Right.
Pastor,
Yes.
doesn't it say in Acts, I don't know what it was Paul that said it, but he said, who do I follow? Do I follow the Lord, or do I follow the government? When he was given speech. I mean, as Christians, we're first to follow what God tells us to do.
Yes, as long, and we follow the government as long as it doesn't make us deny God in doing
Right.
it.
Right.
But I think the verse you're looking for is Hezekiah 14:9. That's my catch-all
Joshua,
passage.
who may I serve?
Just sounds like there should be a book of Hezekiah, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, there's not, but it just sounds like there should be. Yeah, I think it was in, I don't know if it was Acts or 1 Corinthians where he said that, that some follow Paul, some follow Apollos, and I follow the Lord. Our responsibility as Christians is what we saw in Luke chapter 10.
Surrender unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and
Well, yeah, that's part of it, and unto the Lord what's the Lord's. But we just had what's called the golden rule. Do to others, have them do to you, right? Let's go back to Luke chapter 10.
I know they're throwing babies also over the border so that their children can be here.
Yeah, some have thrown their children across the border so that their children can be here. Some have hurried across the border about to deliver
Yes.
in order to deliver in America. And by the way, what the president said was not accurate. We're not the only country that allows people born into this country to be citizens. There's about 30 countries that do that. That was corrected on the website Truth or Fact or Fiction. But that there are many other countries that do that too. But they do it for the purpose of what? Why do they want their children to be citizens of America?
It's better here for them.
So they can stay.
So they can stay. First and foremost, to stay. Now,
Bring the rest of their family here.
being more cynical perhaps, or more realist even, they might be the same thing at times, it's so that they get taken care of.
Yes.
But isn't that a good thing? That we get taken care of. I think that's a good thing. But look at Luke 10. When we get back to I want to go back and look at this again in the light of what we've been talking about with immigration. And if you've got questions or comments, please raise your hand. I want to include all today. So he talks about, he's answering the question, who is my neighbor? And Jesus tells this parable. It's not a real story, it's a parable. And you're familiar with it. Remember we read it? We're familiar with it? A man going from Jerusalem to Jericho. He gets attacked by robbers. He's stripped of his clothes. He's beaten. And they went away, leaving him half dead. So does this man have some physical needs?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And even is his life threatened?
Yes.
Yes. In the parable, the man's life is threatened. So you have a priest who is one of the leaders of Israel, the one who offers sacrifices on behalf of the worshipers to God. When he sees the man, he crosses the road and goes by on the other side. The Levite, who is a leader in Israel with the laws, when he sees the man, although he's familiar with all the laws of what you're supposed to do, because God told him how to take care of aliens and people need and stuff, he ignores those laws, he ignores what was taught, and he does what? He goes to the other side as well. Now, why do you suppose they crossed the road to the other side? What is there about this story that we can relate to very, very well with the feelings of both the priest and the Levite? What did they?
Lack of compassion.
A lack of compassion. What did they have instead of compassion first and foremost? What stole compassion? What made it so compassion would even be on the table?
Pride.
Themselves.
Fear.
Selfish.
Fear. Has somebody said fear? Fear is the great, we said this before in other messages I've preached. Fear is the enemy of love and compassion. If you're afraid, you can't begin to be caring about anybody else, because who are you thinking about? Yourself and the fear. That's why you're afraid. And so fear is an enemy to even thinking about and perhaps considering compassion. So why would there be legitimate, and look, the fear was legitimate here. Why would there in the parable be legitimate fear for the priest and Levite to cross, to go on the other side and go past the man and not do anything about it? What would the fear be, Nancy?
They were robbers.
They were robbers. People robbed this man, and they not only robbed him, but I mean, it's bad enough you take the man's money. They stripped him of all his clothes, and they beat him up and left him pretty bad straits, half dead, right? So the fear of physical being attacked, being robbed, being left the same way as this man.
Yeah.
So fear is what Jesus is addressing when he does this. He talks about the fact that they crossed the other side because they feared being like this man, or were the robbers still around, they would do the same to me. So, if we're going to truly be compassionate in all situations, fear is not something that we can let rob us of a chance to act on compassion. I want to go back to World War II and Hitler, where he told all those in his nation, and then in Poland and other places that he conquered, that Jews were not allowed in their country, that they don't deserve to live, and you are not to protect them, you are to tell us where they are, and they are to be taken from the country. And the people did not know that none of them were taken from the country, but they were taken to concentration camps and turned into labor forces and scientific experiments and many other atrocities, including death. And so the church, and this is one of the saddest things to read in history, the church in Germany, the Christian church, the evangelical, fundamental Christian church in Germany at the time, the believing in Christ and salvation and forgiveness, that church that was in Germany was convinced by Hitler and all who followed him in their propaganda that the Jews were to be kicked out of the country. They didn't necessarily think they were to die, but they thought they were to be kicked out of the country because they're ruining everything in our country. They're ruining the economy. They're ruining everything about our country. And so they needed to be kicked out. And so it was preached from the pulpit to follow Hitler and his things. That was preached. And there was one pastor in particular there were a few pastors, but one in particular who became famous is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. You ever heard of Dietrich Bonhoeffer? Well, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a pastor in Germany. He was in seminary at the time, and he spoke against his professor who was following what Hitler's doctrines were. And he got kicked out of seminary, he got arrested, he fled, and then he came back and eventually was put into prison. And when the Allies came to free people from the concentration camps, he was in a concentration camp, and he spent several years in a concentration camp before the Allies came. And when they came, before the Allies took it over, and the guards knew that they were defeated. They knew that the Allies would be here soon and kill us if we're still here. They took Bonhoeffer out of his cell and killed him so that he would not escape. They killed him. It's a good, interesting biography to read, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And his whole point was he was trying to call the church to compassion, to have compassion for the Jews. He wasn't trying to say, let's support a different candidate, let's do it. There were no candidates. It was Hitler or nobody. Yeah. You know, you're under a dictatorship. And in order to follow what this is teaching, chapter 10 is teaching, you can't give in to what? Fear. So were there Christians around the German Empire, which included not just Germany, but the Netherlands and Poland and some other places, Belgium and some other places, eventually France, were there some Christians in these countries that didn't listen to the government and what it was saying, but at the risk of their own lives and property, their houses and property and their lives, did what?
Hid them.
Hid Jews and
Or
kept
got
them from
them
being arrested and going to the concentration camps.
Yeah.
And also helped them escape.
And helped them, like the Underground Railroad in the time of slavery, they also helped them to escape. Now, so as we look back on history, who's shining the brighter? The Church of Germany, the evangelical church in Germany that agreed with Hitler and followed what Hitler said, or the Christians that went against what the church said, willing to count the cost? See, I have protested abortions for years, and others in the church have protested abortions for years, and have been arrested and have gone to jail for a few days. And you got to be willing to count the price that if you should be caught or you should be found out, you got to face, you got to face the penalty. And Corrie ten Boom is probably one of the most famous of these. I was just in the Netherlands last year. And the #1 tour in all of Amsterdam in the Netherlands is the Corrie ten Boom house.
Wow.
#1. You gotta go online before you get there to get tickets.
Who's that?
Anybody. But the Corrie ten Boom. Corrie ten Boom is a lady who was kept by a family, and they made a secret room behind their walls. And they fed her and kept her, and this. But as we were talking to our waiter at the table, and we were mentioning about the ten Boom story, he goes, "Do you know that is only one of many in the Netherlands? It's not even the one that did the most. It's just the most popular." He said, "All my neighbors," and he was a gentleman in his 50s. He said, "I was a little kid and heard the stories told to me from my neighbors." Because our whole neighborhood in the 40s, before he was born, in the 40s, everybody on our neighborhood had a Jew in their house, at least one. He said everybody. It happened quite a bit.
My father's from the Netherlands, and he told those stories.
He told those same stories.
Yeah.
Well, why did Christians do that? I mean, was it legal for them to do that?
No.
No. Why did they do it?
Against
Compassion.
Because of compassion.
It's against
And compassion overcame the what?
Fear.
Fear. Overcame the fear.
And it wasn't only fear for themselves, but fear for their families.
Oh, it was fear about everything. They and their families would have been killed or taken to a concentration camp as well. They would have all suffered for it. Well, so, and you can look at this throughout history. Throughout history, it's Christians who come to the aid of the oppressed when, at times, because instead of giving in to fear, they had compassion. Now, who are we following and having compassion? Well, we're following what Jesus said. See, I have no answer to what our government needs to do about the immigration problem. It's a big problem. And that's why they have run for public office, because they feel they can help solve these problems. And, you could hold their feet to the fire of, well, let's see you solve them. But the point is that as individuals, citizens in our country, we need to not give in to fear, but be compassionate. Now, people say, well, there's going to be criminals coming into the country. Yes, that happens. You do your best you can to stop them, but, is the percentage coming in any higher than the percentage already here of criminals among Americans anyway? And the reality is, a sinful heart's a sinful heart, you're going to have problems. But you don't throw the baby out with the washboard just because there are going to be, you're going to miss a criminal here and there. The thing is to get them. But what you're going to do with compassion is, you're going to help people who are running from death, who are running from starvation, who are trying to come to a place that we have been known for centuries, for 2 centuries, as the place of hope, the place that, the message of why the French gave us the Statue of Liberty, is because of who we are. And I think that my own personal responsibility as a Christian and as a citizen of America is, I want to see the political representatives in Washington realize that we are a nation that opens our doors to immigrants. Mostly everybody here, other than the Native American, is an immigrant. At one time, our families were immigrants at one time, or they were brought here unwillingly as slaves, which is even worse. They were forced to be here. And so none of us have a history that's pure. And secondly, that we want to make it known that we want to show the love of God, and this is our opportunity as Christians to help show the love of God. Now, our church is on the East Coast. It's not on the border of Mexico and South America through Mexico. But if our church was on the border, then, you know, it's the starfish example. You can't save every starfish on the beach, but the one in front of you, you got to pick up and throw back into the water. I think that, and churches there do things to help at the border, to be at the border and to help. They help with filling in forms. They help with housing people, feeding people, taking children, and promising that when you get across, we will give it back to you. They do things. Now, are everything they do legal? No. So what do they have to be willing to do?
Risk.
Follow the law.
Not follow the law. They got to be willing to do what?
Risk.
If you're not going to follow the law because you're trying to follow God, what do you have to be willing to do in trying to follow God?
Risk getting punished.
You got to be willing to accept the consequences and face the punishment.
There's human risk. There's going to always be human risk.
There's human risk, and there's property risk, and there's jail time, and there's other things. And you have to ask yourself, what does God want me to do? And fear cannot be the first thing that makes us answer that question, because we will always, if fear comes first, we will always cross the road. We will always cross the road. You understand my analogy?
Yes.
We'll always cross the road. This man who didn't give in to fear, who was an enemy because he was of a different race than the Jew, and they hated each other, this man didn't give in to fear, but he showed compassion. So then what does Jesus tell the Jew to do at the end of the story? He said to him, well, which one was neighbor? And he said, who? The one who showed compassion. So what did Jesus tell him to do?
Go and do likewise.
Go and do likewise. So now we get back to Matthew 7 with the golden rule. What would make you go and do likewise? Put yourself in the person's shoes. Put your family in that person's family shoes. Maybe it's your children, your grandchildren. And it's only when you can relate to people, and again, I'm not talking about how does this problem get solved politically. It needs to be worked on, needs some creative minds, got to have some creative solutions. But as people who we're studying the love, I mean, if we can't work through some of this now, how in the world are we ever going to deal with enemies? Love your enemy. You know, I mean, we got some hard road to come across here yet. And you might think, well, you know, okay, Pastor's talking about love again. No, we got some rubber meet the road stuff here, some hard things to face. So, comments on what I've just said. I'll stop and comments.
I just have a question about the illegals that come here, that make the border. They sign into our system and they get assistance, and some of our people in America can't because they make like $2 or $3 over a certain amount that the state has supplied. So because there's a lot of immigrants using those systems, I mean, I'm being the other side of the thing, because I see a lot of it take advantage of the system that are here illegally. A lot. It's not just one or two of the people I come in contact with, or a lot.
And what in the system are they taking advantage of?
The medical system.
Welfare.
The
Medical
medical,
stuff.
welfare, the,
Food stamps.
they don't marry because they're illegal, they can't get married because they can't get a license. And
How would we answer what Pam just raised?
There's a lot of United States citizens that do that too.
Yeah, but they're
A lot
United
of-
States citizens and they have the right to do it.
No,
if they're citizens, that's different, and they
I
go
don't-
through all that.
You
But-
don't
'cause-
have a right to do it if you're a United States citizen. It's against the law.
You don't have a right to get welfare as a United States citizen?
You do.
But if you lie to get
But
it,
not to
Yeah, but
lie.
yeah, you're right.
if they lie to get it. How we answer, what are some things to consider with Pam's objection?
Keep praying about it and try to help them be legal.
Well, I mean, I'm
I
not
know,
talking
I've
about a
seen
few, but the same starfish thing, I'm talking about, and globally in the United States, they're bleeding us because of that.
I
And-
kind of find it hard that they're bleeding us,
Can I touch
Ah.
on that?
because we're still the wealthiest country in the world. So, when you listen to that cliche, and you realize that, yeah, it's illegal and they're taking funds illegally, but we're still the wealthiest nation in the world that they're taken from.
But are people that are
What were you gonna
unable
say?
to because of,
I'm not saying it's right.
No, but I'm just-
I'm just correcting the facts. Just taking with it, like Sergeant Friday, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts.
Even if we are the wealthiest nation in the world, I don't think it's right that anybody should be able to abuse our systems. If you're much wealthier than me, I have no right
We
to
have,
take-
we have laws to govern it, right?
Yeah, but they don't work. I work construction, right? And I work with a lot of illegals on a daily basis. And most of them work construction, get paid cash, and still collect GA benefits and food stamps.
yep,
I don't, because I'm on the books and I'm a citizen, because I can't do that illegally. And that's the problem, that's the root of all problems. Most of them that work here work off the books, so they can still collect unemployment, or not unemployment, welfare, GA, and food stamps.
Good, did y'all hear that one?
yes.
I want to address this one. Whose fault is that?
The government.
The people? No. The people who came in that are illegal? Whose fault is it?
The government.
People voting for
Boss's
the
fault.
The people who hire.
It's the employer's fault.
Right.
They're cheap labor. If you have the
It doesn't matter. The employer will say, well, it's because it's cheap labor, a legal excuse to hire an illegal. No, it's not. The employer's responsibility is to hire only people who are legal.
So he's the one breaking the law.
He's the one ripping the law. He's not paying tax. He's paying cash. Is he paying his part of Social Security?
No.
It's
No.
not Social Security, it's
It's-
insurance.
Is he paying that? No, he's paying cash. He's getting labor at half the price it would cost him if he had you working for him.
Do you know how much insurance costs on a construction
Yes.
company? 30% of wages. Say I get paid $1,000 a week. He has to pay $300 more just to keep me on the books. They don't have to do that for them. They just pay him $10 an hour.
So he's
$100 a
right.
day, and that's it.
So he's right.
And
No.
that's
No,
it.
he's not right.
It's not right.
He needs to charge more if he's got to pay. If he's got to pay that, he's got to charge more. It's
And if he
just
charges more, then they're going to use the people who are a full crew of illegals, and they don't even have a real company they're working for. They're doing it all on the side, and then they're going to get all the money. That's how it works.
yeah. I understand how it works. I'm just saying, what's his responsibility? So two wrongs make a right. No, it never
There's
does.
two systems that feed off each other. They come here illegally, and then we benefit off the work. Fine.
Okay. Well. Okay.
It's understanding that they are.
See,
in some
aren't we
insurance.
being a bit like the Levite
No, I don't think
and
so. I'm just
the
making a statement.
priest in the situation?
I think step number one is like, they're people. They're not illegals, they're people.
Here illegally.
And I think we need to remember that, like,
How many, 600 mil, what was the
Okay.
number that we
600,000.
allow in?
Okay.
600,000.
Let me go back to something. They're here illegally. Why do they have jobs?
Because they want to make money.
To support their family.
Because
support
people
their
can
parents.
get
Somebody will hire
it
them.
for cheaper.
Somebody will hire them.
Somebody will hire them. Why will people hire them?
Because they work.
I know several farmers who have hired illegals, and I know contractors who have hired illegals. And the reason they hire illegals to rip off roofs of a house is because they can't find anybody who is a citizen willing as many people to do that job as they do? Oh yeah, that's true.
I rip off roofs.
All right, I did too.
I'm just saying.
Were you ever a farmer?
Yes.
Oh, you were, Austin. Where
I
did you,
worked on a farm in Sussex County. Actually.
what did you do on that farm?
I baled hay, I worked tractors, I maintained equipment, I did everything that you're supposed to do.
And I worked on a vegetable farm.
Okay.
So we had things to do every day.
Yeah.
Who picked all the tomatoes?
Machine harvesters.
No, before machine harvesting. I'm a lot older than you.
Okay.
Who picked machine? Who picked the tomatoes? Who cut the asparagus?
The migrant.
It was not illegals. It was not illegal. It was migrant workers
That's right.
who came from Puerto Rico, legitimately on a visa to work a farm. And when they finished the season, what did they have to do?
Go back.
They had to go back.
Yeah, but that's.
Why did they have migrant workers? Why did the government pass that law to allow migrant workers to come in and have a season to work and then go back? Why did they have to make that law?
Enough people to leave.
Because there weren't enough people in our labor force to do it. People wouldn't do those jobs. If you take away, and I've heard this in many legal discussions, if you take away the illegals from our country and our labor force, I'm not talking about those who aren't in labor, just those that are doing labor, there are many industries that are going to have a problem and are going to crash because they're the only ones willing to do the work. And it's usually the worst jobs and the dirtiest jobs that they're willing to do, and nobody else is willing to do them.
Why do you think that is?
Because they're hungry.
No. I'm
And
saying
their
why-
families
no,
hungry.
I'm saying, why do you think the people here are unwilling to do those jobs?
Because they get welfare and they get other government aids, and they would rather get the welfare and not give up welfare and sort of work. Because you're going to get just as much through welfare as you're going to do if you're working for a minimum wage below minimum.
It comes with healthcare.
But what it is, and it's something that they're actually trying to pass, is most jobs that are of that type, and because most people want to go into fields where with high pay or office jobs, that's the majority. Everyone's college educated jobs. That's why they're trying to force, not force, but they're trying
They
to
push it on the young
push on vocational training and stuff like that to try and make up for the labor force gap. That's why there's all those jobs, because nobody wants to do this work when there's much better jobs with less stuff.
Much better jobs or more free money?
Yes.
Both.
Well, it's
Both
not
are
as hard
reasons.
as work. There's a big problem in my generation and the generation before me that people were scared of hard work. Their parents said, you need to go to college, you don't want to be a laborer. Look at that guy over there sweeping the streets, you don't want to be that guy. So they all went to college, and that left a huge gap in the labor force. And if we stop telling our kids
But all
that,
those,
we start
but
telling
all
them it's
those needs need to be met. All those industries need to continue. You still need people to clean the bedrooms in the hotels. You still need people to cook the meals. You still need people to pick the vegetables. You still need people to cut the wood. You need people to do all these things. Now, we're not going to solve, I didn't bring it up to solve, how do we solve it as a nation? I brought it up to say, what does compassion show? What does compassion mean? If a man is willing to work so that he can feed his family and take care of his family because in the country he came from he couldn't do that, I have compassion for that man.
I have compassion.
I'm not saying he's right. I'm not saying he doesn't need to pursue a green card or pursue legitimacy. I'm just saying I start with compassion.
I've had this discussion with several people, and where I've had to land on this is really comes down to attitude. It's not our country and stuff like that. Are you having the me and my attitude? Because if you look at God and his example, if God had did that, none of us would have salvation.
Mm-hmm.
So God not having the me and my attitude, him and his attitude, I feel we have to have the same attitude as God, where it's him and his.
I agree with you. It's more of I got mine, you can't have any.
Right, and I understand where we struggle with labor force and stuff like that, because I work as a contractor, I understand where that comes from. But the truth is, we do have a lot of benefits in this country, and we do have a lot of things that God has blessed us with. And for us to hoard it, I don't feel is godly.
No, I'm not talking about.
Well, the whole thing is I have to always ask myself, am I walking across the street?
Yeah.
But in those situations, it's me and mine, right? I'm worried about myself, I'm gonna go that direction.
It's fear, it's worry, it's cost. And Jesus in his parable used everything he could to answer every question of the problem of why we don't do it by what the Samaritan did do. Time, money, using his own donkey, not being afraid, going back and helping after it was all over, revisiting to see if it's still over. He used everything that we're afraid of to speak against in the Samaritan. And that's the point of his message. And I'm not saying we can come to a conclusion about what we do as a government. I'm saying we need to come to a conclusion what we do as an individual. As an individual, I can't let those things stop me first. I got to at least be sure I have that first. Once I have that, then I got to move forward. What do I do? What am I allowed to do? What legally do you do? But without compassion, I'm nothing.
Right, because how would, if you work side by side with those people, they weren't hired by you, but I would still want to treat them with respect. I still want to care for them. You know, maybe they're...
And many don't.
And many don't.
Yeah.
Many of them brag that are doing it too.
Yeah. So, and I, you know, I've always said this, I'm not going to turn my back to anybody who's hungry.
No,
And if I were a doctor, I'm not going to turn my back to anybody who's sick.
but they do.
I don't care. And if they got insurance, they don't have insurance.
Right, it comes down to attitude and you serving God. That's
right.
what's the bottom
Yes,
line.
I understand that. I was just talking about the states.
Maureen?
This is probably just a very simple thing that I think when I get worked up over some of these issues too. This is God's plan. This is the way He has us going, and I don't know what's ahead for America. But I see this as God's plan. I don't understand all of it, but this is the way He wants it.
He allows it.
He's bringing Muslims in, which, you know, people get all riled up about. In fact, I have to be careful. I was talking to someone, and they were talking about the Muslims, and I said, oh, and these people. And I was like, I'm sorry.
Why did I say these people?
Right. They're people. What do you mean, these people? They're people. They're like us.
People aren't breaking the border to get into Mexico.
But
People aren't breaking the border to get to
This is
Iran.
what God is doing right now. This is His work. I can't believe it's not.
Yep.
God allows evil to happen too.
Sometimes if we change our own attitudes about how we treat others in those low, dirty jobs, just not treating them as, well, you're just slave labor, but you're somebody that's important. Because in a hospital, you need cleaning crews as well as the doctors to keep the infections down.
Do you know that in a Chinese buffet, the workers are instructed not to get into conversation with you if they can speak any English at all, to not get into conversation with you? Do you know why?
Because Americans are illegal.
Because they're afraid that you are there from the government to catch them and to turn them in because they're illegal. Yeah, pretty simple. Bill, you were somebody in front of you.
Lisa had one.
Lisa?
I had a question.
Okay, first, go ahead.
I don't even like to bring this up because it concerns me, the caravan that's coming into the country. And I guess I am political, I'll admit it. I follow what everybody says. I like to see what everybody's views are and everything. And I'm an immigrant. I came here when I was 19. And I feel I am compassionate. I mean, I know by the things I do, I have a certain amount of compassion. I'm sure it could be a lot more, but not. Is it wrong for me to look at it from a political? I mean, I feel there should be law and order in a country, because without law and order, a country cannot run. And
That's why God established governments, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Law and order
is
is
it
important.
wrong for me to look at it from that point of view too?
No,
'Cause
Christians have to look at it from...
I struggle with
Christians
that.
have to look at it from law and order as well. I mean, we want people that are, you know, breaking the law to have to face the fact of it. But,
I mean, it scares me when I see
but
them
there,
throwing
but,
rocks
but,
and everything.
but that's coming from a well, you know,
That's fear.
it scares me.
Yeah.
Fear.
Yeah.
And what is being said is to make you afraid. It's to purposely make you afraid. Have they come across the border yet?
No,
No. Have you gotten close?
there's still hundreds.
But what does our president say he's going to do? He's going to send how many troops?
15. They're already.
30,000 troops are going to are going to guard the border with guns. Now that makes people afraid.
Yeah, that makes me nervous. And I
Well,
fear for them too.
fear is a good motivation to get what you want to get. But is fear something that a Christian is to do first and foremost? I mean, even in facing someone who wants to take my life, is fear, you know. I went to Trenton State Prison 18 years. I didn't tell you a lot of the stories in there. And I'm prime fodder for being held captive because I'm not a state worker. I'm a volunteer. And I rode on elevators with guys that had muscles on top of muscles, who were angry, who were spitting, and it's just me and 4 of them on an elevator going up to 3 floors. At any time, they could jump me and stuff. So if I gave in to fear, what would happen?
You would stay home.
I wouldn't have gone. I'd have stayed home. And there were times I had to give it over to the Lord. But by not giving in to fear, Adrian Percy's pretty happy.
Yeah.
Woodrow family's pretty happy, and some others are pretty happy. And you just got to count. You can't let fear be the reason you make a decision. Once you get rid of fear, now you can think more clearly to follow what God wants you to do. You can't let fear, and that's why fear is the enemy of compassion. Compassion is what God requires first. Now, work it out.
When you come right down to it, God is in control.
He is.
He's in
He is.
control
How big is
tomorrow. The whole
Work it
thing
out.
tomorrow.
It's all.
He's in control.
Okay, I'm taking away from your coffee time. I owe you 6 minutes.
Okay, Pastor.
All right, go ahead and you're dismissed.